President Trump nearing the end of his high-stakes visit to China now. He kept his word on having that long private meeting with President Xi. They sat down for more than 2 hours. President Trump says it was extremely productive. I'm Harris Faulkner. You are in the Faulkner Focus. President Trump is now revealing more about his private conversation with Xi. Here he is with Sean Hannity in an interview that will air in full tonight.
President Xi would like to see a deal made. He would like to see a deal made. And he did offer, he said, if I can be of any help at all, I would like to be of help. Because,
he did say that.
Yeah, he did say that. And look, anybody that buys that much oil has obviously got some kind of a relationship with him. But he said, I would love to be of help. If I can be of any help whatsoever, he'd like to see the Hormuz Strait open. He said, if I could be of any help whatsoever, I would like to help.
The White House says the two leaders talked about ways to enhance economic cooperation in the flow of fentanyl precursors into the United States. And they agreed, again, as the president just pointed out, that the strait needs to be free and open as a waterway. She also, though, expressed interest in purchasing more American oil to reduce China's dependence on the Strait of Hormuz in the future. The White House says both leaders agreed Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. Here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Economies are melting down because of this crisis in the Straits. They're going to be buying less Chinese product, and the Chinese exports are going to drop precipitously. So it's in their interest to resolve this. We hope to convince them to play a more active role in getting Iran to walk away from what they're doing now and trying to do now in the Persian Gulf.
Now, you may recall in 2017, President Trump again got the full state visit treatment in Beijing. However, some observers now are saying this visit feels more personal. Trump and Xi smiled, shook hands, and walked through the ceremony together. The images are warmer, but the stakes are higher. Steve Yates, a former deputy national security advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney, is coming up in focus. Let's begin with senior White House correspondent Jacqui Heinrich in Beijing. Jackie.
Harris, China really spared no expense rolling out the red carpet for President Trump. He was also a very gracious guest here. However, at the state banquet, there were also warnings from Xi that were wrapped up in pleasantries. And in the Chinese readout of the bilateral meeting, there was more of a direct threat even. It called Taiwan the most important issue for U.S.-China relations, saying if it isn't handled properly, quote, the two countries will have clashes and even conflicts, putting the entire relationship in great jeopardy. Taiwan independence and cross-strait peace are as irreconcilable as fire and water. The U.S. side must exercise extra caution in handling the Taiwan question. Now, we were thinking from that statement, it was likely that Trump did not give Xi what he wanted on Taiwan. And an interview with Marco Rubio just in a little while ago indicates that the U.S. did not, as expected, change its position. China, though, was expected to dangle some help with Iran in exchange for some movement on the Taiwan issue. Accordingly, China's readout makes no mention of Iran. But the White House readout says President Xi also made clear China's opposition to militarization of the strait and any effort to charge a toll for its use. And he expressed interest in purchasing more American oil to reduce China's dependence on the strait in the future. Now, it's not clear whether more purchases of American oil will result in fewer Chinese purchases of Iranian oil. But Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent indicated the U.S. doesn't really need China's help.
I think they're going to do what they can, and here China has a much bigger interest in reopening the strait than the U.S. does. China gets about a third of its energy needs from the Gulf. The main loading facility for Iranian oil is a facility called Karg Island. We've seen that there have been no loadings in the past 3 days. We believe their storage is full. They're going to start shutting down their production. We can see that that's happening from satellite photos.
Now, China's readout also mentions that Xi referenced the Thucydides trap in his meeting, which references how tensions between a ruling power and a rising power have often resulted in war historically. Those are some sharp words. And in the backdrop of all of this, Russia just piped up to remind folks that they are friends with China, too, saying that Putin will be coming here in the very near future, Harris.
Yeah, making it look a little bit more like a play yard, unfortunately, than the world stage acting like that. Jacqui, thank you very much. In focus now, Steve Yates, former Deputy National Security Advisor to Vice President Cheney. He's also Heritage Foundation's Senior Research Fellow for China. Great to have you today. First of all, what do the American people get out of this visit to China?
Well, Harris, very, very important question. I think the first challenge the American public is going to need to have is sort of suspend disbelief about what the words are exchanged, and let's watch carefully what actions follow. There's a lot of theater that goes into exchanges with China, maybe with every country, but especially with China. Some of the words that Xi Jinping is expressing personally sound reassuring. They could be reassuring. And then, as your reporting accurately gave, some of the official Borg talk that comes from the bureaucracy has a bit more fangs in the smile than the pleasantries that came from Xi Jinping were. And that's just a reminder that the Chinese Communist Party is a system. It's not an individual. Xi Jinping has a lot of power, but ultimately it's a system, and that's a challenge for any American interlocutor trying to negotiate.
Look, people are looking at gas prices. They hear that maybe somebody would like to also join us in, opening a free waterway in the Strait of Hormuz. Actually, the words, as you said, sound better than some of the words that we've heard from members of NATO on that issue.
Odd irony in that, for sure, Harris. But here's an example of where China's extension of power at distance is not what people might think. They have not actually exercised that much influence. They were part of the problem, obviously buying a lot of illicit oil that was under sanctions because of Iran being the world's largest state sponsor of terror. And they haven't exactly exercised influence, and probably, as General Jacqui has intimated, don't really want that regime to go away. They've had decades of relations with it. So this is where I think the president's probably making some pressure points and inducement points, and we'll see whether the Chinese adjust. But really, this is the disparity. America is a world superpower exercising shaping influence. China is somewhat of a tactical influencer. So on tactics, maybe the president can get some progress.
Interesting. And they've known each other for a period of time. So that private conversation, even though there may be some shared moments, I'm sure there's some that won't be shared. Jacqui mentioned Jacqui mentioned the comment from President Xi Jinping. He said the meeting between the U.S. and China puts the world at a delicate inflection. Watch this.
The world has reached a new crossroads. Whether China and the United States can overcome the so-called Thucydides trap and create a new paradigm of great power relations, whether we can work together to address global challenges and inject more stability into the world.
What does that mean to you?
Well, the Thucydides trap narrative really has come out of China. It's been echoed and amplified by a famous Harvard academic. And I think it's been pretty powerfully rebutted by Victor Davis Hanson, who is a classicist supreme. But essentially, it's part of the Chinese narrative that they're on the rise somewhat inevitably, and that America and the West are broadly on decline. And it's sort of a hint to the world, maybe you ought to make a deal for the side the elevator's going up on. But the reality, I think, President Trump has done a good job of shifting that negotiating table. America has different relations in the broader Middle East. America has had powerful influence on energy flows. Key choke points like the Panama Canal, Straits of Hormuz, Straits of Malacca, all really heavily influenced by America. At some level, Xi has to know that reality, not the academic version that the Central Party School is giving about Thucydides.
Well, look, and Steve, I mean, if you take a look at a map today of the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf Coast of the United States, they're very different right now. Yes, there's a U.S. blockade on, so that's what we're capable of doing. And yes, there is a whole lot of commerce going on with oil refining and selling it off the coast of the United States, the Gulf Coast, that heavy crude that's coming through Venezuela. So the game has changed. I don't know if China wants to publicly say that, but you know they see it.
And one indication of that, Harris, is the statement that China's agreed to buy more from America on energy. That is an interesting flipping of the script where they tried to hold out rare earths as a critical vulnerability. And I think President Trump has pretty effectively exposed that they have some massive vulnerabilities and dependencies. They need access to America's consumers badly. They don't function without it. And they have huge dependencies on energy, and America is a part of the solution.
Real quickly, Taiwan, and the kind of a warning shot from Xi saying, you know, if you mishandle that, the United States, there could be conflict.
Now, in my lifetime, there's been a variation of that statement in every presidential exchange. The Chinese deliver it from top to bottom. It's empirically not true that Taiwan is the most important issue in U.S.-China relations. There are several others that are quite big, but it is a potential flashpoint. And I think so far, all indications the president handled it exactly as he should. Just shift to other topics and emphasize cooperation elsewhere.
Steve Yates, always great to have you in focus. Thank you. Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.